Invincible Season 1 looked like this. Season 2 looked like this. And Season 3 looks like this. Somehow, the animation got worse with each season. There's less use of lighting and shadows, the backgrounds have fewer details.
Okay. Boom. So niggas always say like, oh, it's not the animator's fault. It's like they got deadlines and a heavy workload and all that. Okay, boom. It's not the animator's fault themselves. Nigga, it's still somebody's fault, and they still could shift the focus a little bit. I feel like people saying that they waste the money on getting actors to play the voices, that also could be true. But I like, bro, just the amount of comparison, niggas is like, it got worse animation. It really got worse animation than like, the animation ain't even bad though. I don't even watch it in like, it's not bad. It's just the bare minimum, the barest of minimum. Like, nigga, Black Clover had better animation. Way better animation. Niggas was like, that was the trashiest thing ever. Nigga, if they had Black Clover animation, niggas would be jumping in joy. Jumping with joy, nigga. Dragon Ball Super had better animation. Like, dang.
The character designs and expressions are simpler, and there are way more static scenes. In Season 3, they even reused shots from Season 2, thinking we wouldn't notice. But how is that even possible? How can the writing keep getting better, while the animation we wouldn't notice? But how is that even scenes? In Season 3, they even reused shots from Season 2, thinking we wouldn't notice. But how is that even possible? How can the writing keep getting better, while the animation gets worse? It's almost funny how fans can recreate scenes from the show with even more detail, smoother movements, and stronger personality. These fan-made scenes have a cinematic feel, like they're straight out of a big-budget Hollywood film. You might prefer a different style, but there's no denying that they stand out more than the original scenes, which look flat and lifeless. Sometimes it looks like they're sliding a PNG across the screen.
Unacceptable.
We can explain Invincible's poor animation with just two words: money and time. The two things Invincible doesn't have. You might think it's a multi-million-dollar show just because the Prime Video logo appears in the intro, but in 2023, Marge Dean, one of the executive producers, said that Invincible had only a quarter of the budget of The Boys. That show costs $11 million per episode, which is already on the low side for a top-tier series. To give you an idea of what Prime Video usually spends, Citadel costs $50 million per episode, and Rings of Power costs $58 million. If we take Marge Dean's statement seriously, we'd have to divide 11 by 4, which leaves us with just $2.75 million per episode.
I mean, that's a big number, but that's probably not
monopoly
that much.
Money. I know it seems like a huge number to us regular folks making minimum wage, but keep in mind that those $2 million cover the total budget for each episode. That money isn't just for the animators. It also covers the writers, directors, composers, editors, colorists, and voice actors who take a big chunk of the budget. Invincible has some very well-known actors who probably get paid really well, like Stephen Yeun and J.K. Simmons. That $2 million isn't enough to hire the best animators out there. And there's also not enough money to expand the team and get more people.
I know they making stupid money though. Like, this is like one of the most popular animated shows ever.
Working on Invincible. A show like this should have a massive team because the comic is packed with action, explosions, and superpowers. But seasons 2 and 3 only had about 10 animators per episode, the same number as X-Men 97. That show looks way better than Invincible, but Marvel was able to pull off that level of detail.
And the contrast, bro, the difference. X-Men 97 to Invincible, it's like, it's night and day. That animation was beautiful, nigga.
Smoothness, because its episodes are half the length. Invincible's episodes are 40 minutes long, double the standard runtime.
Okay, 8 episodes. X-Men 97 had like 10, and it was all like 30 minutes. So this is like twice as long right here.
For animated TV shows. In an interview with Bleeding Cool, Marge Dean said they have to create twice as many assets as a normal animated show because Invincible has tons of different designs, models, and backgrounds. And with a small team, that's really tough. Even the show's animators explain this in comments like this one. This user says they worked on the compositing team for seasons 2 and 3, and that they wish the show had a level of detail similar to Arcane or Castlevania. But that was impossible with such a small team. There were only 4 people in their department, including the editor. Just 4
Wow.
people to handle over 200 shots per
Yeah,
episode.
they
To help you
got
understand
hold.
why this is so important, compositing is the stage where all the elements on screen get put together. The characters, backgrounds, and effects. This is also where lighting, shadows, and filters are added to make the final image look good, like in this scene from season 1. But if there's no time to work on this stage, the composition will be basic, and the characters will look pasted onto the background with no depth at all, like slapping PNGs onto a static photo. Compositing is what sets these two images apart.
I think I just learned something.
If Invincible had more than 10 VFX compositors, it would have looked way more cinematic. But to have a team that big, the show's budget would have needed to be bigger, like way bigger. Arcane, for example, had a budget of $14 million per
Arcane,
episode,
Lord.
5 times more than Invincible. And Across the Spider-Verse, which is one of the
Everything can't
best
look like
animated
that, though.
projects ever, cost $110 million. Phil Lord
But
and
it's one
Christopher
movie.
Miller, the film's directors, said their team had over 1,000 animators from all over the world.
Lord.
Invincible has just 10 animators per episode, and some episodes have even fewer. It's not that these animators lack talent, skill, or motivation. They just can't keep up with the workload. I know this won't be a popular opinion, but we should actually be grateful that the show looks the way it does, and not way worse. The real culprit is Jeff Bezos and the execs at Prime Video, who didn't want to invest properly in the adaptation of one of the best superhero comics ever.
Cheapness is not a sense.
And I already know what you're thinking. None of this explains how a fan managed to do this from their own home, or why the teasers look way better than the full episodes, or how Demon
Of
Slayer
course the
looks
teaser
infinitely
gonna look
better,
better.
despite having a budget of just $80,000 per episode. That's only 4%.
I mean, we can't compare nothing to Japan. Nigga, they got sweatshop workers. Them niggas got beds in their office.
of Invincible's budget. Wasn't a huge budget supposed to be
Okay,
necessary
thanks
to
for the
do
follow.
things right? It is, but that's where time comes in. Season 1 was in production for almost 3 years,
Appreciate
from
you.
2018 to
How's it going?
2021. Even with a small team, they had enough time to create beautiful animations like this one, and put more effort into compositing, which is the weakest part of the later seasons. Of course, they use classic tricks to save time and money, like using CGI for backgrounds and vehicles, or hiding characters' mouths in less important scenes, so they only had to animate the eyes when they're talking. That happens in every animated show,
Yeah.
even the ones with way bigger budgets. And yeah, I know there were a few infamous scenes, like this one, that turned into memes. But the fight scenes, the ones that needed the most movement and energy, were good. They knew how to hide the lack of budget and staff, and the same thing should have happened in Season 2, but that wasn't the case. It took them 2.5 years to release Season 2 at the end of 2023, and they even split it in half. We had to wait 4 more months for the
Bro,
last
I remember
episodes,
that,
which
bro.
only dropped in March 2024, and the result was worse than Season 1.
That doesn't make any sense.
But actually it does, because they switched to animation studios between seasons. Season 1 was made by a coalition between Skybound,
Coalition.
Robert Kirkman's company, and Winsun Sky, a studio in Vancouver. They had teams in LA, and even hired some freelance animators from Korea and Japan, which is
Bro,
pretty common for
All this money they making, something needs to improve, bro.
American shows. But when Prime Video renewed the series for Season 2 and 3, Skybound decided to build
Did
its
they
own
renew it for
animation
Season 4?
division to be independent. They hired Marge Dean to create Skybound Animation and put her in charge of producing Season 2. That decision impacted the entire schedule. Marge Dean said that when she joined Skybound, she had to start everything from scratch. There was no studio, no staff, just Kirkman, Corey Walker, the comics artist, and Simon Rasiopa, one of the executive producers. They had to hire new animators and set up a physical studio
Okay.
in LA, which was complicated by the pandemic. The animators only really started working in 2022, so they had way less time than they did for Season 1. This was confirmed by Katrin Snodgrass, one of the people in charge of the storyboards for Seasons
Feel like
2
it
and 3.
should
I was
get
hired
better,
as a
hopefully.
storyboard revisionist in April of 2022 to work on the Adam Eve special. It actually took only
The
a
Adam
year,
Eve
and
special
we made
looked
2
good
seasons
though,
at
but it was
once.
one
Meanwhile,
episode.
Skybound outsourced the teasers to Balak, the co-creator of Last
Oh,
Week.
wow.
That's why the teasers have Mappa-level animation. A
Yeah.
separate team worked exclusively on 2 short teasers, while the main team worked on the full season. Prime Video tricked us with these animation changes, but expecting this level of quality
Bruh.
for every episode would be ridiculous. We're comparing a 2-minute teaser to an 8-episode season where each episode is 40 minutes long. Besides, we can't underestimate the power and passion of a studio that's all about making horny furry stuff.
I'm a little turned on.
Back to the show.
Excuse me?
Switching animation teams between seasons affected the overall style. They used less CGI and went for more hand-drawn scenes. But since they had less time to work, some scenes ended up looking way too static. The best example is the battle between Omni-Man, Mark, and the Viltrumites on Thraxia. It should have been one of the best moments in the entire show, at least
Yeah,
up
their
to
fight, it was a good moment. I like it, but the animation, it was just like
that
eh.
point. But half of the fight felt like a slideshow,
It
and the
literally
composition
was.
wasn't as polished as in Season 1. They had to split the season in 2 because they just couldn't keep up. Kirkman justified the split by saying they didn't want to release episodes during the holidays, and that they wanted Invincible to have a new season every year. But Rasiopa admitted they made the decision while production production was already underway because they ran into problems. No one on the team wanted to say exactly what went wrong, but it's no coincidence that episode 4 had the worst animation in the entire show. I have no doubt that they were running out of time and had to delay the last episode simply because they weren't finished yet. If you don't believe me, listen to what Kirkman said in an interview with The Ringer. Coming from the live action world, I'm like, animation is like comics. There's no budget. We can do whatever we want. It's not exactly true, which is possibly the reason for some of our delays, because we had a big appetite and unrealistic expectations, and those kinds of things take time. That's the key word, time. The fan who reworked the composition of these shots said it took them 4 hours per shot. And earlier I mentioned that each episode has over 200 shots. That means at least 800 hours of work per episode just for compositing, an absolutely insane amount of time. Japanese studios can pull that off because their animators literally work 20-hour days. There have been cases where they had to sleep in the office, like what happened to Cloverworks staff during the production of Wonder Egg Priority. Sure, Japanese studios deliver better results for less money. Shows like Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, and Dandadan have way better animation than Invincible, but they pull it off by overworking their animators to the extreme. They work in miserable conditions for ridiculously low wages. That doesn't happen in the US, where working conditions are much better. Of course, there's still room for improvement. Sony ran into problems for overworking the animators on Across the Spider-Verse. But in the US, people don't jump off buildings just because they couldn't finish an episode on time. For Invincible to look better, they'd need to take at least 3 years between seasons, and they'd need to hire more people. But that's never gonna happen. With the insane amount of content out there, thanks to the streaming wars, waiting 3 years for a new season is way too long. Invincible already risked losing relevance because of the long wait since 2021. If they kept doing that, people would just forget about the show. The ratings would tank, and Prime Video would cancel it before they even finished adapting the comic. Sure, there have been animated shows that made fans wait forever and still managed to stay popular, like Attack on Titan. They took 3 years to release season 2 and split the final season into 1,000,000 parts, but the anime still kept its hype. But in the worst case scenario, Invincible could end up like Tower of God season 2. Not even the animators' families watched that thing.
I'm not gonna watch it.
To make things worse, this is a really long series. Kirkman said he wants to do 7 or 8 seasons to cover the entire comic, so we're not even halfway there. If we had to wait 3 years between each season, the show wouldn't wrap up until 2037, if we're lucky. It's a shame that Prime Video won't invest more in Invincible. With a bigger budget, the show could look way better, even if they wanted to release a season every year. It wouldn't be a visual masterpiece like Jujutsu Kaisen, but at least the fights would do the comic justice. And no one would say this is their favorite show despite the average animation. But the crazy thing is, despite all these production issues, Invincible has still managed to surpass Marvel and DC. We explain how he did it in this video over here.
Like, popular though, they gotta be getting buku money from it, bro.
Not Invincible.